James had never expected that his life would be so different, so quickly. The partnership between humanity and the Ely race had opened doors to possibilities he hadn't even dreamed of. The Ely were a highly advanced species, known for their incredible ability to adapt, heal, and comfort. They were not warriors or conquerors. Instead, their gift to humans was their ability to ease the burdens of everyday life, a comfort unlike anything humans had ever known. It started with a program called Companions for Humanity. The Ely had offered their technology to help humans cope with stress, anxiety, and the overwhelming challenges of modern society. With the fast-paced world and constant pressure, many people found themselves overwhelmed. The Ely Companions were designed to help, to bring peace, to listen, to offer care. They were not slaves or servants, but equals. Still, the program came with guidelines, and humans were required to maintain respectful boundaries with their Ely companions. The program was meant to help, not to complicate. When James was first selected to receive an Ely companion, he had mixed feelings. On one hand, he was intrigued by the idea. A personal companion who could help him manage his stress after years of constant work pressure? It sounded like a dream. But on the other hand, the idea of having someone, even an alien, so close to him, especially in his private space, felt a little too strange. The thought of having an Ely in his life was unsettling at first. But then there was Lyra. James had met her when he walked into the program's headquarters, unsure of what to expect. She was not what he imagined. She wasn't a robot or some kind of super-intelligent machine. No, Lyra was very much alive, a living, breathing being, yet she radiated a calm, quiet energy that made James feel immediately at ease. She was tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like silver under the soft lights of the room. Her hair, long and wavy, moved almost as though it had a life of its own, and her eyes, those deep, glowing eyes, seemed to see straight through him. They weren't just bright. They seemed to hold a universe within them. "Welcome, James," she said softly in a voice that seemed to resonate deep within him. "I'm Lyra. I'm here to help you." Her words were simple, but they carried weight, and James felt an unexplainable sense of comfort. She wasn't like the cold clinical assistants he had imagined. There was warmth in her voice, something human-like, even though she was from another world. Over the next few days, James spent more time with Lyra. They would talk, share stories, and sometimes just sit in silence. Her presence was soothing, like the calm after a storm. Lyra seemed to know exactly what he needed before he even said a word. She made sure he ate, took breaks, and even encouraged him to pursue hobbies outside of work. It was as if she could read his mind, but in the most gentle way possible. At first, James thought it was all part of the program. He didn't really question it. The whole point of the companion program was to ease the stress of the human race, after all. But as the days went on, he started to notice something else in Lyra, something he couldn't put his finger on. There were subtle glances, the way her gaze lingered on him when he wasn't looking. Her smile was warm, almost affectionate, and James couldn't help but feel a little warmth spread through him whenever she looked at him that way. He had to admit that he looked forward to their time together. Lyra was always patient, always understanding, but there was an energy between them that was hard to ignore. And then there were the hints, small comments she made here and there, not overt, but definitely noticeable. One evening, after a long day of work, they were sitting together in the living room. Lyra was reading a book, some alien text, James assumed, but she always translated it for him. They were comfortable in the quiet, when suddenly Lyra put her book down and looked at him. "James," she said softly, "would you like to sleep now? I think it would be good for you." James looked at her, a little puzzled. "Sleep now? But it's only early evening." Lyra tilted her head slightly, her long silver hair falling over her shoulder. You've been working hard. Your body needs rest, and I could keep you company if you like. James wasn't sure what she meant by that. He was used to being alone when he rested. He'd always preferred solitude, not that he had ever truly needed it. But Lyra's offer, so gentle and subtle, made him think twice. He hesitated, not wanting to offend her, but also unsure of where to draw the line. I'm fine for now, Lyra. I'll sleep later. But Lyra didn't seem to take offense. Instead, she just smiled, and the way she looked at him with those deep, knowing eyes made James feel both seen and understood in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. The next few days passed quickly, and Lyra continued her quiet support. But the subtle hints she dropped didn't stop. She would suggest little things, like sitting closer when they watched shows together or offering a hand to guide him through the halls. It was always kind, never forceful, but it left James feeling uncertain about their growing connection. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the stars from the window, Lyra turned to him again. "James," she said, her voice soft and serious, "have you ever thought about the next step?" "The next step?" James echoed, confused. "What do you mean?" Lyra's eyes met his, and for a moment there was an intensity in her gaze that made his heart race. "Companions are meant to ease the stresses of life," she said slowly. "But sometimes comfort comes in different forms. Sometimes it's about sharing more than just space." James felt a rush of heat in his chest, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't sure what Lyra was suggesting, but one thing was clear. She wasn't just talking about rest or companionship. There was something deeper here, something that neither of them had said outright, but was starting to be undeniable. James couldn't stop thinking about Lyra. He tried to focus on his work, but her words echoed in his mind. Comfort comes in different forms. What did she mean by that? Was she hinting at something more than just companionship? He had never expected to be in this situation. The Ely were supposed to help, but not in this way. There was no manual for handling this kind of relationship. For days, he pushed the thought to the back of his mind. He tried to remind himself that Lyra was a companion, not someone who could be more. After all, she was from an entirely different species, one that was far more advanced than humanity. What would someone like Lyra want with someone like him? It didn't make sense. Yet every time they spent time together, James felt drawn to her in a way that made him feel both comfortable and nervous. She was always there, offering quiet support, never pushing him too far. But there were moments, small moments, when their connection felt different. Her gaze lingered on him a little too long, her voice soft and comforting in a way that made his heart race. One evening, after a long day of work, they were sitting in the living room again. Lyra had just finished preparing a meal for them both, and they were now enjoying it together. The room was quiet except for the sound of their quiet conversation. It was one of those peaceful moments that James had come to cherish. "James, how do you feel?" Lyra asked, looking at him from across the table. James raised an eyebrow. "How do I feel? I'm fine." "You don't look fine," Lyra said with a soft smile. "You've been tense all day. Are you sure everything is okay?" James shifted, in his seat, unsure of how to respond. He didn't want to admit how much he was struggling with the emotions he was feeling. After all, what did he have to complain about? Lyra was here to help him, to ease his stress. But she was more than that now. She had become a constant presence in his life, and it was hard to ignore the way he felt when she was near. "I'm fine," he said again, this time more firmly. "Just a lot on my mind, that's all." Lyra's eyes softened. She didn't push him, but her gaze didn't leave him either. "You know, James, you don't have to hide anything from me. We're companions. I'm here to help. Whatever is Troubling you, we can talk about it. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to say something, to explain how he felt, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply nodded. He knew Lyra was trying to help, but there was something about her that made it difficult to talk to her. It wasn't just that she was an alien. It was the way she seemed to understand him in ways that he didn't understand himself. As the night went on, James found it harder and harder to focus on anything but Lyra. She sat next to him, her presence calming, but it was more than just comfort. It felt as if she was too close, as though the space between them was shrinking with every passing second. Every time their eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding. Lyra seemed to know that something was changing, something that neither of them could put into words. Eventually, James excused himself and stood up from the table. "I think I'll head to bed," he said, trying to sound casual. Lyra looked up at him, a small smile on her lips. "I'll join you in a moment." "You need your rest, James. Don't stay up too late." It wasn't unusual for Lyra to join him at the end of the day. She was always around, making sure he was comfortable, reminding him to take care of himself. But tonight, her presence felt heavier, more meaningful. James couldn't ignore it any longer. The pull between them was undeniable. He walked to his bedroom, hoping the quiet of the night would help him clear his thoughts. But as soon as he entered, he found himself distracted by the sound of footsteps behind H.M. He turned to find Lyra standing in the doorway, looking at him with an expression that James couldn't quite read. "James," Lyra said softly, "may I join you tonight? Just for a while." James paused, his heart skipping a beat. It wasn't the first time she had asked, but tonight, the question felt different. Her voice, her eyes, they were all laced with something deeper. He didn't know how to respond. What was happening between them? Was this just part of the companionship, or was Lyra truly asking for something more? He tried to tell himself that. It didn't matter. After all, they were just two beings, one human and one alien, trying to navigate a strange new world together. But when he looked at Lyra, standing there so calmly, so poised, he couldn't bring himself to turn her away. She wasn't asking for anything wrong. She was only offering comfort, the same comfort she had always given him. Yet, tonight, that comfort felt different. It felt personal. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can stay." Lyra smiled, and without another word, she stepped into the room. There was no rush, no force. She simply moved closer, her presence enveloping him like a gentle wave. As she sat down next to him, her body language was calm, but there was something in the air that was hard to ignore. James couldn't help but feel that the dynamic between them was shifting. What had once been simple companionship was now becoming something more complex, more intimate. And despite his confusion, despite his doubts, James didn't want it to stop. He wasn't sure where this was headed, but for the first time in days, he felt a sense of peace. James couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of the apartment's lights the only sound in the room. Lyra was still next to him, sitting quietly in the chair across from the bed. She hadn't spoken much since they had sat down together, but her presence was a constant, like a weight that both comforted and confused him. Lyra's gaze had lingered on him more than usual tonight. It wasn't just the usual concern for his well-being. No, tonight it felt different. Her eyes seemed to see more than just him. They seemed to understand him, to know him in ways that made him feel vulnerable. The silence stretched on, and James found himself shifting uncomfortably beneath the covers. He wasn't sure what to do. The question he had been avoiding now seemed impossible to ignore. What did Lyra want from him? He had been taught to respect the boundaries of the companion program, to treat the Eli with the care they deserved, but also to understand that their role was purely to assist, to offer comfort, not to cross into personal territory. But now he wasn't so sure. Lyra had been nothing but kind to him, offering care and support when he needed it most, but the line between companionship and something deeper was becoming increasingly blurred. When she spoke, it was soft, almost like she had been waiting for him to ask her a question. "James, are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. James turned his head to face her. Her expression was unreadable, calm, but there was something in her eyes, something that made his heart race, even though he didn't fully understand why. "I'm fine," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just thinking." Lyra didn't say anything at first. She just watched him, her eyes never leaving his face. There was a slight tilt of her head, a sign of curiosity, but she didn't push. James felt the tension in the room building, the question between them hanging in the air, unspoken but undeniable. "What are you thinking about?" Lyra finally asked, her tone gentle. James hesitated. He didn't want to tell her what was really on his mind. He didn't want to admit that every time she was near, he felt something shift inside him, something that he wasn't ready to face. He didn't want to admit that his thoughts were no longer focused solely on the work or the stress of his daily life, but on the way Lyra made him feel. She made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years, but it also scared him. "I don't know," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just everything. It's all a lot, you know?" Lyra nodded, her expression softening. She stood up and walked over to the bed sitting on the edge. "I understand," she said. "I'm here to help you, James, to ease your burden. But sometimes that means allowing yourself to be open, to let go." James felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to speak, to tell her how much her presence meant to him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply nodded, unsure of what else to say. Lyra leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking with his. "It's okay to be vulnerable with me," she said, her voice calm but full of an understanding that made James feel exposed. "You don't have to carry everything alone. Not anymore." Her words were gentle, but they felt like a challenge. Could he really let go? Could he let her in? Trust her with the things he had buried so deep inside him? James looked at Lyra, at the way she was looking at him, and felt something stir inside him. She wasn't just his companion. She was something more. She understood him in a way no one ever had. She was not just there to help him deal with his stress. She was there to see him, to know him, to connect with him. "I don't know if I can," James admitted, his voice cracking. "I don't know if I can trust someone like you or anyone." Lyra's expression softened even further, and she reached out, her hand brushing against his arm. The touch was light, but it sent a jolt through him, something he couldn't explain. It wasn't just a touch. It was a gesture of connection, of understanding. "You don't have to do it all at once," she said softly. "You don't have to rush, but just know that I'm here. I'll always be here, James." Her words felt like a promise, and despite his doubts, despite his confusion, James found himself believing her. The weight of his worries didn't seem so heavy when she was near. The world didn't feel so overwhelming when she was there, offering her quiet support. "I don't know what this is, Lyra," James said, finally voicing the confusion that had been building in him. "I don't know what we're doing here." Lyra smiled, a small, reassuring smile. "We're just taking things one step at a time, James. We don't need to have all the answers. We just need to be here, together." Her words were simple, but they felt like a balm to his restless heart. He wasn't sure what this was between them, this bond that was growing stronger every day. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to figure it all out. Maybe it didn't matter what it was called. Maybe it was enough to just be with her, to trust her, even if he didn't fully understand everything she meant to him. James took a deep breath and looked at Lyra. For the first time that night, he didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. Instead, he felt a sense of calm that came from knowing he wasn't alone, that he had someone by his side, someone who truly cared. "I think I'm ready," he said quietly, his voice steady. Lyra nodded, her expression softening with approval. "Whenever you're ready, James." And for the first time in what felt like forever, James allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face everything on his own. Not anymore. The next morning, James woke up feeling strange. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed, but something was different. He felt lighter somehow, but also more confused. The night before, Lyra had stayed by his side, offering her quiet comfort and understanding. Her presence had been soothing, and he had let his guard down in a way he hadn't done in years. He hadn't felt the need to pretend around her, and that was both freeing and unsettling. The warmth from the night before lingered in his mind, and James couldn't help but replay the way she had looked at him. Her calm gaze, the way she had spoken to him with such care. It had been more than just a companion's attention. He had started to feel something stir inside him that went beyond the simple comfort of a companion. It was deeper, more personal, and it made him question what he was truly feeling. As he got out of bed and made his way to the kitchen, he saw Lyra already there preparing breakfast. She was humming softly to herself, a song from her homeworld that James couldn't understand, but found strangely calming. She turned when she heard him enter and smiled, her eyes lighting up as they always did when she saw him. "Good morning, James," Lyra said, her voice warm. "I made your favorite today. I hope you're feeling better." James smiled back, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his heart. He wasn't sure what better meant anymore. Had he really been stressed out, or had it been more about the emotional weight he had been carrying all along? He wasn't sure how to explain it to Lyra, but he felt like there was something more between them now, something that was becoming hard to ignore. "Thanks, Lyra," James said, trying to sound casual. "I appreciate it." Lyra placed a plate of food in front of him and sat down across from him. There was no rush in her movements, no hurry. It was as though she was content just to be in the moment, in this quiet space with him. James had to admit it was nice. He didn't often have time for peace, for just sitting and enjoying the simple things in life. As they ate, Lyra looked at him thoughtfully, her expression soft. "You know," she began, "I've been wondering about something." James looked up, curious. "What is it?" Lyra's gaze never wavered. "I've been thinking about how we spend our time together. I know you have your own life, your work, your routines, but I've noticed that you've been more relaxed, happier even." James was silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. It was true. Since Lyra had come into his life, he had felt less burdened, less overwhelmed by everything around him. She had been a constant presence, always there to listen, to help, to offer a moment of peace. He had even started to feel more comfortable with her, more at ease in her company. But was that just part of her role as a companion? Or was it something more? "I guess I do feel better," James said carefully. "But it's not just because of you, I don't think." Lyra nodded, but there was a slight shift in her expression, something that James couldn't quite place. "I understand," she said, though her voice was tinged with something else. "But I can't help but wonder if there's something else, something between us that's more than just companionship." James froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. He didn't know what to say. How did she know? Had she been feeling the same way? He had never spoken his feelings out loud, but somehow Lyra seemed to understand. Her eyes held no judgment, only curiosity and patience, as if she was waiting for him to speak, to make a decision. "I don't know what you mean," James said, his voice unsteady. "You're my companion, Lyra. You've been helping me with my stress. That's all." Lyra's smile softened, and she reached out to gently touch his hand. The simple gesture made his heart race, and he could feel his face flush. "James," she said softly, "there's nothing wrong with wanting something more. I don't just want to be your companion. I want to be someone you can trust, someone you can count on. I care about you." The words hung in the air between them, and James felt a weight settle in his chest. This wasn't what he had expected. He had thought he could keep things simple, keep his emotions in check, but Lyra had made it clear that she wanted something deeper, and now he had to decide whether he was ready for that or not. "I don't know if I can," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been good at trusting people. It's hard for me." Lyra's expression didn't change. She didn't push him, didn't try to convince him. Instead, she simply squeezed his hand gently. "I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for, James. I just want you to know that I'm here. Whatever you need, I'm here." James looked into her eyes and saw the sincerity there. It wasn't just about companionship for her. It was about something real, something genuine. He felt a tug in his chest, a part of him that wanted to give in, to allow himself to trust her, to accept the connection that was growing between them. But another part of him, a part that had been hardened by years of self-reliance, resisted. He didn't know how to let go, how to trust someone so fully. "I don't know what this is, Lyra," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I'm ready for this." Lyra nodded again, her gaze softening. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. We can take it one step at a time. There's no rush." For the first time in a long time, James felt like he didn't have to have everything figured out. Lyra's patience and understanding gave him the space he needed to breathe. Maybe he didn't know what this was or where it was going, but for now, he didn't have to. He could just be with her, and that felt like enough. Days passed, and James found himself thinking about Lyra more than ever. He couldn't help it. Every time they were together, it was as though a quiet connection grew stronger between them. It wasn't just her presence anymore that comforted him. It was the way she made him feel understood. There were no judgments, no expectations, just a calm, steady companionship that he had never known before. Despite his growing feelings, James couldn't shake the uncertainty that clung to him. He didn't know what to do with his emotions. He didn't know how to handle the way Lyra made him feel. Part of him wanted to pull away, to keep things simple, but another part of him felt drawn to her in a way that was hard to ignore. One evening, after a long day of work, James found himself sitting on the balcony, staring out at the skyline. The city lights below flickered like stars, and the cool breeze brushed against his face. It was one of those moments when everything seemed still, as if the world had paused for just a second. Lyra was sitting next to him, not saying anything, just letting the silence between them stretch out. It felt natural. "You know?" Lyra said, her voice breaking the quiet. "I've been thinking." James turned his head to look at her. Her eyes were focused on the horizon, but there was a softness to her expression that made him pause. "About what?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra took a deep breath and looked at him. "About us," she said simply. "About everything." James swallowed. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to ask her what she meant, but part of him was afraid of the answer. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? Was she feeling what he was feeling? "You're not just my companion, Lyra," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "You're something more. I don't know what it is, but it's there." Lyra smiled, a small, knowing smile that made James's heart race. I'm glad you said that, she replied, her voice gentle, because I've been feeling the same way. James turned to her fully, his eyes wide. What do you mean? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. I've been trying to figure it out, Lyra said, her eyes meeting his. I've always known my purpose as a companion is to help you, to ease your stress. But lately it feels like it's becoming something else, something deeper. James didn't know how to respond. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what Lyra was saying. She was saying that she felt something more than just her role as his companion. And it wasn't just about the physical proximity between them anymore. It was emotional. There was something building between them, something that neither of them had expected. I've never felt this way before, James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do with it. Lyra reached out, her hand gently resting on his. The simple touch sent a shock of warmth through him, and he couldn't help but feel comforted by her closeness. It wasn't just the physical contact, but the connection, the unspoken bond that had been growing between them. You don't have to do anything, James, Lyra said softly. You don't have to make any decisions right now. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We can take it one step at a time. The words sank deep into James's heart. Lyra was offering him something he had never known before, the freedom to feel without the pressure to define it, to just be with her without worrying about what it all meant. He didn't have to have all the answers, not yet. And that was exactly what he needed. I don't want to push you, Lyra, James said, his voice filled with uncertainty. I don't know what this is, but I don't want to ruin it either. Lyra smiled, her hand still resting on his. You're not pushing me, and you won't ruin anything. I'm here for you. We'll figure this out together. James looked at her, his chest tight. The sincerity in her eyes, the calm assurance in her voice, it made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this. Maybe he wasn't the only one confused by the feelings that were growing between them. I don't know how to explain it, James said, his voice shaky, but I feel like something is changing. And it's not just because you're my companion. It's because of you. Lyra's eyes softened and she leaned a little closer. I understand, James. I feel it too. And I'm not asking for anything. I'm just here, with you. If you want to take that next step, we'll do it together. But if not, that's okay too. Whatever you need. James felt something inside him shift. The weight of his own fears, his own doubts, started to ease. Lyra wasn't asking him to make a choice or rush into anything. She was offering him the time and space he needed to understand his feelings. And somehow, that made everything seem a little clearer. I think I'm ready, James said, his voice steady now. I'm ready to stop holding back. I'm ready to see where this goes. With you. Lyra's smile widened, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them sitting on the balcony looking out at the city together. And in that moment, James realized that he wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, he would face it with Lyra by his side. You don't have to be afraid, Lyra said softly. I'm here. Always. The days that followed felt different, almost like a quiet shift in the air around James. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed, but something inside him had softened. He was no longer trying to deny the bond he shared with Lyra. It was undeniable now, something that went beyond companionship. Every moment they spent together only made the connection between them stronger, more real. Lyra had always been there, offering quiet support, understanding, and care. But now there was something more, a sense of trust and warmth that neither of them could ignore. James had realized that he didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to know what this bond meant or where it would take him. What mattered was that he didn't feel alone anymore. And in Lyra he had found someone who truly understood him. someone who made him feel seen in ways he hadn't experienced in years. But even as James accepted the changes in his feelings, the uncertainty was still there, lurking in the back of his mind. What if this was all just a passing phase? What if his emotions were just a product of spending too much time with an alien who had been designed to care for him? He couldn't shake the fear that it wasn't real, that his feelings were being influenced by something beyond his control. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, James couldn't ignore the tension any longer. He had to ask the question that had been on his mind for days. "Lyra," he began, his voice a little shaky, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Lyra looked up from the book she had been reading, her eyes meeting his. There was no hesitation in her gaze, no sign of doubt. She set the book down and leaned forward slightly, her expression calm and open. "Of course, James. What's on your mind?" James swallowed hard. "I've been thinking about everything, about us, and I need to know if you feel the same way. I need to know if this, what we have, is real, or if it's just because of the way you were designed. I don't want to get hurt, and I don't want to hurt you either." Lyra was silent for a moment, her gaze never leaving him. James could feel the weight of her stare, as if she was carefully considering his words. It made him nervous, but he didn't want to back down. He needed to know the truth. Finally, Lyra spoke. "James," she said softly, her voice full of warmth, "I understand your concerns, and I promise you what we share is real. It's not just because of my design. Yes, I was created to help humans, to provide comfort, but my feelings for you go beyond that. I care about you. I care about who you are, not just because I was programmed to, but because I want to. I'm here because I choose to be, James." The words hit James like a wave, sweeping away the last of his doubts. He had known deep down that Lyra cared for him, but hearing her say it so clearly, so honestly, made everything feel more certain. It wasn't just his imagination. This connection, this bond between them, was real. And it wasn't something that could be easily explained away. "I don't know what to say," James whispered, his heart beating faster. "I never expected this. I never expected to feel this way about you." Lyra smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile that made James feel lighter than he had in a long time. "You don't have to say anything, James. You don't have to figure it all out right now. I'm not going anywhere. We'll take this one step at a time, just like we always have." James took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. The weight he had been carrying for days seemed to lift, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel the full extent of his emotions. He didn't have to be afraid anymore. He didn't have to keep his feelings hidden or second-guess them. Lyra was here, and she was real. Their connection was real. "I think I'm starting to understand," James said slowly, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "I've been holding back, thinking that I couldn't trust this. But now I know that I don't have to be afraid of it. I don't have to be afraid of you." Lyra's smile widened, and she reached out, placing her hand over his. The simple gesture of contact sent a warm rush through James, and for a moment he forgot everything else. There was only the two of them, sitting together, sharing this unspoken understanding. "I'm glad, James," Lyra said softly. "I'm glad you're ready to take this step with me. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." James nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting into a small smile. "Together," he repeated, the word feeling more and more right with each passing second. The evening stretched on, the quiet of the room filled only with the sound of their breathing, the occasional soft laugh between them. It felt like everything had shifted, like the foundation of their relationship had been set, stronger than ever. There was no longer any doubt in James's heart. He trusted Lyra. He cared for her. and he was ready to see where this journey would take them. As they sat there, James realized that he had never felt more certain of anything in his life. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that with Lyra by his side, he could face it. The world outside might have been uncertain, but in that moment, in the quiet of the room with Lyra, everything felt right. The days after their conversation passed in a blur, but everything felt different now. James no longer felt the weight of his confusion and fear. Instead, there was a quiet certainty that filled him every time he was with Lyra. She had been right all along. They didn't need to have everything figured out. They just needed to be together. And that was enough. Lyra had always been by his side, offering comfort and support, but now their relationship felt deeper. They no longer danced around their feelings for each other. There were no more unspoken questions between them. James had stopped pretending to be someone he wasn't. With Lyra, he didn't need to hide. She accepted him, flaws and all. She made him feel like he was enough, just as he was. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, James found himself sitting on the couch, staring out the window at the stars. Lyra was next to him, as always, her presence calming, like a steady anchor in the chaos of his life. He had come to realize that it wasn't just the quiet moments that mattered, but the moments they shared together, no matter how small. "I've been thinking," James said, breaking the silence. He turned to look at Lyra, who was watching. Him with that same calm expression, her eyes filled with understanding. "About what?" Lyra asked, her voice soft. James smiled to himself, feeling the warmth of her gaze. "About how much has changed, how much we've changed," Lyra nodded, her lips curving into a gentle smile. "I've noticed that, too. Things feel different now, don't they?" James let out a soft laugh. "Yeah, they do. I never thought I'd find someone like you. Someone who makes everything feel so right." Lyra reached out, her hand gently resting on his. The simple touch was enough to make his heart skip a beat. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "I never thought I'd find someone like you either. Someone who makes me feel like I belong." For a moment, neither of them said anything. There was no need for words. Everything they needed to say was in the way they looked at each other, in the quiet bond they shared. They had both been so afraid of what they felt, so afraid of giving in to something that felt so different, so uncertain. But now, they didn't need to fear it anymore. They had both taken the leap, and it had brought them here, together. "I don't know what the future holds," James said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "But I do know that I want to face it with you." Lyra smiled, her eyes shining, with something that James couldn't quite name. "I'm glad," she said, her voice filled with warmth, "because I want to face it with you too." There was something so simple, so pure about their connection. It wasn't about the grand gestures or the flashy moments. It was in the small, everyday things. The way they could sit together in silence and still feel like they were exactly where they were meant to be. The way they understood each other without needing to explain every little thing. It was in the comfort they found in each other's company. For the first time in a long time, James felt like he didn't need to worry. He didn't need to question his choices or second-guess himself. With Lyra, everything felt natural, like it was meant to be this way. There was no pressure, no fear. There was just them, and that was enough. The days passed, and their connection only grew stronger. They spent their time together, finding joy in the simplest things. Sometimes they would take long walks, just talking about everything and nothing. Other times, they would sit in silence, content to be in each other's presence. It didn't matter what they did. What mattered was that they were together. One afternoon, as they sat on the balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, James turned to Lyra, his heart full of something he couldn't quite express. He had never thought he would be in this position, never thought he would find someone who made him feel so whole. But here he was, sitting next to her, and he realized that he had never felt more at peace. "I don't know how to say this," James said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I've never been this happy. Not really. You've changed everything for me, Lyra." Lyra turned to him, her expression soft and tender. "You've changed everything for me too, James. I didn't know what it felt like to truly be seen, to feel like I mattered to someone. But with you, I felt that every day." James smiled, feeling the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. He had never known what it was like to be truly understood, to have someone care for him without hesitation. But with Lyra, he had found that. She had shown him what it meant to trust, to love, to be vulnerable without fear. "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next," James said quietly. "I'm ready to face it all with you by my side." Lyra's smile widened, and she leaned in closer. "I'm ready too," she whispered. "Together, we can face anything."